Hey folks, welcome back for session 4 of creating your book cover. It's me again, Charlie Vince, the illustrator, and I'm going to be taking you through today's session. Let's do a quick recap of what we've done so far. So in session 1, we had a look at research and honing your creative voice, generating ideas, recording those ideas and developing them further. In session 2, we expanded on those ideas even more, learned how to create thumbnails and went really in depth into composition. Then, during the last session, in session 3, we developed our line work, we looked at how to use reference correctly and explored different materials to create this line work. Now today is my favourite one, which is session 4, and we're looking at colour and texture, two of my very favourite things, how to work with text, and finally, creating our final book cover. Just like in the other ones, we're going to have some activities throughout this session, so make sure you've got the gear that you need. The bits that you will need today are plenty of pens and pencils to draw with, any other drawing and colour materials that you can find, at least 2 bits of paper, whether that's A4 or A3, and your final line work from last time. As usual, let's get stuck in with a couple of very quick, very silly warm-ups. So grab your bit of paper for me, fold it in half as usual, and let's get started. The first thing I'm going to get you to do on one half of that bit of paper is draw a plant in 60 seconds. That's all, super simple. Now we're going to take that plant drawing and we're going to turn it upside down, and in the next 60 seconds I want you to turn that upside down plant into a creature. Any creature, doesn't have to be real, can be anything you want, but in 60 seconds turn that upside down plant into a creature for me. And the last warm-up today is on that other half of paper. I want you to please fill it for me with different shaped leaves. Again, they don't have to be real. You don't have to think and pull from your brain, oh, how many real leaves do I know? Just draw a bunch of leaves. Really pretty. It's a nice exercise, this one. 60 seconds, ready, go. Now that we've had a quick warm-up, let's get started with today's session. And first of all, I want to tackle final piece worries, which is something that I know I definitely have when I'm coming to the end of a project or the end of something I need to do, and I need to finally create that final piece. You may feel worried about it going wrong or certain things not going as well as you wanted, but a really good way to tackle that and to make it an awful lot easier is to explore the options first. So work out what options you have, work out what it is you genuinely enjoy by testing it first. So that's what we're going to be doing for the first part of today's session, is testing and exploring and trying out different methods for the final piece. Just to drive home the importance of this, I'm going to remind you of that little diagram I showed you a couple of sessions ago about generating ideas and about exploring different ideas. Remember, if you default to the first thing you can think of, you may miss out on some really good, even better, refined, more exciting ideas. And the best way to find those is to explore and try stuff out, even if you feel like you're not going to be very good at it. It will also hugely help boost your confidence in what you're doing and what you're planning on doing going forward. A good example of this is if you hadn't explored anything, if you hadn't tried out things, if you hadn't tested things, your way forward could look an awful lot like this. You're not sure how it's going to go, you're not sure whether it'll go well, you don't know whether you can do it. But if you had explored, if you had tested, if you had tried stuff first, it clears the path for you and makes it seem so much more plausible and you're capable of doing this final piece. So let's quickly go through what we've done so far in making sure we can clear this path and get rid of all that nasty fog and see a nice confident way towards making this final piece. Here are some things that will definitely help, and now let's have a look at which of these things we have done. And we've done quite a few of them. So far, we fully understand our mission because I've told you what it is you need to do. I've explained to you how book covers work. We've covered all of that. Creating lots of thumbnails, yeah, we've definitely done that. We did that right at the beginning. Experimenting with drawing techniques, we've absolutely explored lots of those. We've found whatever we have lying around and tried drawing with it. We've broadened our knowledge of composition, which is so important, especially for things like book covers. And we've done plenty of warm-ups. I'm sure you have a stack of very weird 60-second drawings right now. So all that's left to do is explore colour and texture, which is how we will bring all of these final ideas together and then get stuck into that final piece. May as well get started in that case. So let's get started with colour. There are endless ways that artists use to create their final piece. We've explored a few of them so far, but we're going to explore even more today. This is just a few. These are just a few that I can think of off the top of my head, but there's loads more options here. And what an artist chooses to use is entirely up to them, their preferences, what the book cover would lend best to, and they discover all of that through all that experimentation that we've done so far in the previous sessions. All of these methods require some knowledge of colour and tone for them to work. Even if it's a black and white or monochrome image, the artist is going to need to know how to use the rules and the concept and the psychology behind colour in order to make it work well. So why is colour so important? What does colour do? What does colour add to a piece other than just making it colourful? Colour will communicate and resonate with the audience quicker than images. You will notice a colour quicker than you will notice what the colour is inside of, so what picture it is you're actually looking at. It instantly creates an atmosphere and a mood around the thing that the viewer is looking at. So immediately it's communicating quicker and it's communicating an atmosphere as well. There is infinite possibilities around colour because there are infinite colours. So there's so many different options and different directions you can use when you are utilising colour. Colour directs the viewer to that focal point that we discussed when we were looking at composition so beautifully. Remember when we looked at framing and isolation and contrast? All of that can be enhanced massively by using colour well. And it obviously will help the artwork to stand out, like this amazing Frankenstein cover that I've got here. Instantly looks very unique and bold and contrasted, grabs the user's attention immediately. And a little note at the bottom there, which I'm going to reiterate a little bit more as we go through today. It doesn't have to be literal. It doesn't have to be true to life, especially when you are looking at the broad range of illustration that you can use for book covers. Like I said, colour is quite a broad subject, so I've narrowed it down into 4 key areas that we're going to cover today. First of all, we're going to look at the meaning and the psychology behind colour. Then we'll have a look at value and contrast. Next is palette, and then after that we'll have a look at saturation. If you're not familiar with any of these terms, don't you worry, I will cover all of it. First of all is looking at the meaning behind certain colours and what it is they can communicate. As a general rule, a lot of the key colours that we notice and that we're familiar with communicate main things to us. So here's a few examples of the sorts of things that we can think of when we see certain colours. This is a method used an awful lot for things like branding. As a really good example to display that, the colour blue is often associated with social, reliable and secure concepts and ideas. This is why so many companies and organisations and institutions will use blue in their logos, because what it's communicating is a very positive, reliable thing. So mechanical companies like Ford and Samsung will want people to know they're reliable, and social media will like people to think that they're secure with their security and their social aspects. So companies will utilise blue a lot. In terms of what we're looking at with our project and how colour can be used for book covers, it is a very useful tool for storytelling. Specifically, a very good example is graphic novels. They will use colour a lot to communicate changes in scene, in atmosphere, temperature, time. Loads of different aspects and concepts of the story can be communicated just using colour. A really good example is Skip by Molly Mendoza, which is my favourite graphic novel of all time. It's beautiful. And she uses colour amazingly. In the story of Skip, the characters go through lots of different lands and scenes and settings. And in order to communicate that, Molly doesn't literally show them moving from one to another, she uses colour. And the way she uses colour communicates not only the change of scene, but dramatic scenes and heat and temperature and fear. And there's so much that she manages to communicate by using these bold, contrasting colours. And a really important thing to note about specifically Molly Mendoza's use of colour in Skip is it is non-literal. So remember when I briefly talked about the fact that colour doesn't have to be literal, it doesn't have to be true to life. Using this and using changing colour and switching it on its head can be really impactful. So as an example here, you've got an illustration by Molly Mendoza of the character falling into the water. And you can see these mad colours and mad abstract shapes coming off of the character. That's not what it looks like when someone falls into water. You can see it doesn't look like that. But you know what's happening. And not only do you know what's happening, but it's communicating a mood and an atmosphere. Another example would be this beautiful illustration. And they use cold, cool tones of purple and blue to really exaggerate this cold, foresty, spooky, eerie feeling to it. It's not what cold, snowy forests actually look like, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be a photorealistic representation of what is happening in the scene. If it's cold, you can just whack some more blue and purple in there, and it makes it more interesting to the viewer and will grow the atmosphere and exaggerate what it is they're supposed to be feeling when they look at it. Using non-literal colour helped me specifically as well, especially when I first started doing digital art and I was confronted with that colour wheel where it's every single colour you could ever use. And so my brain, when I first started using Photoshop, went, oh nice, every colour. I'd better use every colour. So my illustrations for the first few years of using digital techniques were a rainbow mess. But now that I've realised I can limit that palette and start using non-literal colours, my work has got so much more interesting. I'm so much more happy with how it looks now that I flip things on their head. For example, in this illustration of the characters from Kubo and the Two Strings that I did, the ground isn't actually that colour. The sky isn't actually pink. The grass isn't actually red. Like, these are non-literal colours. The same in this one. Those bushes probably would not be that colour. I've not seen a fern that's blue and pink before. I wish I have, but I haven't. And in this one as well, those trees are a crazy shade of red, the bushes are a strange colour, but it doesn't have to be literal. I wasn't trying to make a photorealistic scene. By using colours that aren't true to life, you can make your pieces so much more interesting. Next, we're going to have a look at value or contrast. Just to give you some definitions as to what these words actually mean, value is the lightness or the darkness of a colour, and contrast is the difference between these colours. So value would be that gradient we can see on the left, and contrast is if we grabbed two colours from that gradient and compared them. It's the difference between the two. I've got a few examples for you here. See if you can work out amongst you which ones you think are low contrast and which ones you think are high. Have you had a think? Alright, I'll show you which ones are low and which ones are high. Here you go. So, first of all, on the left, black and white. That's the highest contrast you can get. Those two slightly different shades of grey are definitely low contrast. Doesn't have to just be shades of grey and black and white though. That brown and yellow are definitely high contrast. And even though the blue and green aren't similar colours, the value that they have, the brightness and darkness that they have is very similar, so they are low contrast. I'm going to show you an example photographically now that aren't just two colours chosen. Let's see how it all looks in a picture that's brought together. And what better picture to use than my adorable little dog. This is Lola, and this is a normal picture of her that I haven't edited, I haven't done anything to. But if I whack up the contrast, you can see if I picked two colours, the lightest and the darkest colours from that photograph, there's a very high contrast between the two of them. But on the opposite end of the scale, if I brought the contrast all the way down, you can see the lightest and the darkest colours are much closer together now. So this is a low contrast image. Going back to that beautiful illustration from earlier in the woods, this one works so well because she manages to utilise contrast beautifully. So here are the lightest and the darkest colours from this piece, and you can see there's a significant difference. Why is contrast important? What is it that it does in pieces other than just create some difference between the two colours? Contrast helps make parts of the image really stand out to the viewer. So remember how, again, we talked about focal points today and when we were discussing composition, it draws attention and helps locate the focal point for the audience. It makes for a much more interesting and varied colour palette, and we'll get to palettes in a minute. And it stops and prevents this artwork from being a bit too vague at first glance. So if you first look at it and the contrast is very low, your eye won't really know how to navigate it or what to focus on. Next, I want to look at saturation. Saturation is the intensity of a colour. So in this example here on the left, you've got a very low saturation, which goes all the way down to a grey colour. And over on the right, you've got my favourite colour, a crazy bright pink. It can be tempting to use just very saturated colours. It's something we learned from childhood where we're presented with a load of crayons and we are instantly drawn to the bright colourful ones, which is fair, they're very pretty. But when you are creating your pieces and your artwork, don't be afraid to mix up your palette a bit with some more desaturated or less saturated colours. To use an example from my own portfolio, I've got this piece here, which has two key, very bright colours in there. We've got a saturated pink and a saturated blue. But I've balanced those out with some desaturated colours, so most of the background is those more grey, more toned down colours. If I were to crank up the saturation on that and turn it into this monstrosity, there's not much desaturation in there anywhere. It's all really bright and it makes it a bit harder to navigate with your eye. And again, on the other end of the scale, if I were to desaturate it completely, I lose the vibrancy and I lose the focal point. Let's quickly look at why saturation is important and what it can do to our artwork. It can and should be varied throughout the artwork that you're creating. So remember, balance it out with different saturated and desaturated areas. And you can take that to either extreme. You don't have to just stay in that one little middle zone of the colour palette. Go mad, go from one end to the other. This contrast, remember, the values and the saturation that you vary and that you create nice differences with will make your work easier to navigate and much more exciting to look at. Next up is we're going to have a little look at palettes. So the word palette might make you think of a very artist standing in front of a canvas with a little beret and a wonderful wooden palette with all the colours on, like, oh, I must paint my masterpieces. But when I talk about palettes, I'm talking about a combination or selection of the colours that you have chosen to work with, not the physical palette itself. Your palettes do not have to be, like I was when I first started drawing digitally, all the colours. You don't have to fit as many on there as you possibly can. They can be mixed and combined, and you can create these palettes however you like. As I said a minute ago, I used to use all the colours, and it made everything a little bit of a rainbow mess. But now I have learned how to limit my palette and explore limited colour palettes, which adds so much more to my work. If you remember from session 2, when we were looking at thumbnails, I showed you this colour thumbnail. You can see along the bottom there, that's my limited palette. So this helped keep my work grounded in whatever mood I was trying to convey and stop me from using too many mismatched or not thought out colours that would ruin this atmosphere. So how do you choose a palette? How do you work out which colours you want to use? Different artists use lots of different techniques. In fact, I attended a talk a few years ago about someone explaining how they chose their colour palette, and there were so many interesting ways that people in the audience said that they choose their colour palettes. So let's look at a few ways that you could do it. There's the first one, which is you just jump in and choose. Like, you don't worry about it, you just grab the ones you like and hope that they work together. This can work, or it can be a bit tricky. You can use reference, so you can have a look at images that you really like the colour palette of and try to recreate that. You could use viewfinders, which you may have used before, where maybe you create a little square in a bit of paper, overlay it over a piece or an image, and just use what you can see through the viewfinder. This can help isolate colours. Or you could use digital processors. There's lots of websites and software out there that you can upload a photo to, or take a photo of what's happening around you, and it will create a limited colour palette out of that photo. This is where things like research and reference can really come in useful. And you don't have to just look up a pre-made colour palette, even though that is an option. You can have a look at photos that have different moods and atmospheres, photographs from real life situations, and twist that and turn them on their head however you like. You can get inspiration from abstract photography or photography of more close-up textural images, like this beautiful one in the middle of a rusty car bonnet. There's so many unique colours in there that could be turned into a gorgeous colour palette. And of course, having a look at existing artwork. If you find a piece, an illustration, a painting, whatever it is that you love the palette of, you are of course welcome to explore that palette too. And palettes can range hugely in the things that they're communicating and the way that they're formed. You can have warm or cool colour palettes. They can be really, really dark or very bright and pastel-y, or highly contrasted, colours you wouldn't think could work together, but if you put them together just to test it, they actually work really well. So I would like us to explore some limited colour palettes and see what it's like using a limited palette. Hopefully all of you have got plenty of colour materials, whether it's pens, pencils, paint, whatever it is, available right now, because we're going to do a little challenge. I want you to please choose 3 colours, no more than 3, from your coloured materials. Using just those 3 colours, I want you to draw a self-portrait, like this beautiful one that I've put on the screen here. Using those 3 colours, create that self-portrait in 5 minutes. And remember, it doesn't have to be true to life. This is important to note. This person's skin isn't actually grey in real life, but they have chosen to communicate it like that, and it works really well. You can make them darker or lighter with the pressure or the amount of your medium that you're going to be using. So press harder or lighter with your pencil, overlay with the paint or the pen. And do think about your contrast and saturation during the whole thing. You don't have to choose bright red, bright blue, bright yellow. You can have a grey in there if you wanted. It can be really impactful. So, 5 minutes, no more than 3 colours. Let's create our self-portrait. Now that we've thoroughly explored colour, let's have a look at the different tools you can use to actually make this final piece. So obviously today we only have access to traditional methods, so pencils, paints, pens, but most illustrators and designers, when they get towards the end of a project and they want to refine it and get it ready to be finalised, they will use digital techniques as well. So if after all these sessions you want to take your beautiful drawing and beautiful masterpiece book cover and do something digitally with it, whether it's apply text to it or edit it, here's a few free options that you can use. Some of these you can do straight away in the browser. The one on the right there that's called GIMP, you do have to download, but again, it's completely free. So please do consider exploring these afterwards, because learning digital techniques and how to edit your pictures is a really valuable skill to have. You may already have an idea of what it is you want to use to create your book cover, but remember how important experimentation and exploration is in building that solid foundation for your beautiful final piece. So I have another challenge for you. First of all, each of you will need 3 of a different type of material or different medium. It could be pencils, pens and acrylic paint, or it can be felt tips or a rubber and some watercolour. But find 3 different ones and have access to 3 different ones, because we're going to be creating 3 different illustrations, each one using a different medium. They're not going to be super detailed, they don't need to be perfect, but this is just an opportunity for you to explore the different mediums available. First of all, we're going to draw a tree. Then, using a different medium, we're going to draw a crown. And after that, using another one, we're going to draw a fox. These can be drawn however which way you want, but each one has to be done using a different drawing tool. You have 5 minutes to draw each one, so let's get started with the tree first. Ready, steady, go. Now we've drawn the tree, let's move on to the second one, the crown. Alright, so change your mediums over. Grab pens if you just use pencils, or paints if you just use pens. Whatever it is you want to use. You could just scrunch up paper and use collage if you want. But grab your next material and we're going to do a crown. Ready, steady, another 5 minutes, go. Okay, last one. Change your materials over one more time. We're going to do another 5 minutes and we're going to draw ourselves a fox. We all ready? Steady, go. Hopefully all this exploring and experimenting today that we've done would have helped you work out what material and what techniques you want to use to make your final book cover. And in order for you to have time and space to find reference and put lots of input into your brain and try out more things, I will leave you to do your final book cover outside of today's session, but I am going to leave you with some last things to remember once we finish and once you start developing this final cover. Remember to work big and rough first. So right at the beginning when we were looking at thumbnails and using perhaps a lighter pencil underneath before you go straight into line work, these are all really key things to remember when jumping into your final piece. Do avoid jumping straight into doing all the details, because you will find that you would have mismeasured or you've miscalculated something that you could have caught if you'd just done a very rough picture first. Figure out that colour palette first as well. This will help you hugely and will help prevent it becoming a rainbow nightmare like mine used to look like. Remember, you can try those colour thumbnails that I did. And if you wanted to try digital techniques to do that, feel free. Don't forget those free ones that I showed you earlier. And remember to carry on gathering lots of input and lots of research and reference throughout the whole thing. You don't have to get all of this research and reference done at the beginning and then, whoop, finished, don't need to worry about it, all that's done. You can change your research because your ideas will change and your input will change. So keep doing it throughout. It will keep your ideas and your motivation fresh. And lastly, and most importantly, don't give up on it. Do try to avoid beating yourself up if something isn't going your way or something isn't working or you're not very good at something right at the beginning. Remember what I said when we were looking at line work. Drawing is a skill that is learned and practiced. It's not a talent that some people are born with and some don't have it at all. Keep practicing. Be really proud of the efforts that you're putting in. And remember, all of us start somewhere. This beautiful monkey masterpiece is something that I did when I was much younger. And now this is my full-time job. So it's really, really important to remember everybody starts somewhere with this. Don't give up on it. Keep trying, keep practicing. Don't beat yourself up. Keep trucking. Here's your to-do list after today. And it's a very simple one. Finish that amazing book cover that you've been developing. Bring it all together. Put the colour and the texture. Work through your composition. Try those digital techniques. Finish it all up, take your time. I can't wait to see some. As usual, thank you ever so much for joining me today. I really hope you've enjoyed creating this beautiful book cover and you've learned something and you've got a bit more confidence in what it is that you do. Hopefully I will see you for session 5. If I don't, if maybe session 5 isn't as relevant to you, thank you again for taking part and hopefully I will see you soon for another project. Bye!